The Marvel Cinematic Universe is in a unique position as far as entertainment franchises go. With almost 30 films and 6 TV shows telling one continuous story, Marvel Studios has to carefully ensure that all these different pieces fit into a cohesive world, which is only getting harder as more and more stories are weaved into this 14-year-old cinematic tapestry. In other words, MCU boss Kevin Feige and his team of producers has to not only make sure that each project works as a standalone piece of entertainment, he has to make sure that they all make sense within the broader context of this universe. Having to build each movie and show in such a methodical way means that tons of great ideas end up being scrapped. Perhaps they wouldn't have jived with the MCU's many ongoing storylines, wouldn't have fit with the franchise tonally, or were simply unnecessary additions to their respective movies. Now, many of these ideas don't sound like huge losses, but a few of them actually sound pretty darn awesome. From the Winter Soldier's epic alternate opening to a Thanos moment that would have had fans around the world losing their minds with glee. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 awesome ideas that were cut from the MCU. Number 10. ARNIM ZOLA gets a robotic upgrade. ARNIM ZOLA is one of the MCU's most underappreciated villains. Played by the brilliant Toby Jones, the character was involved in some pretty major moments in MCU history, from rebuilding Hydra to turning Bucky into the Winter Soldier. ZOLA was last seen on the big screen in 2014's Captain America sequel, where his attempt to destroy Steve and Natasha with a couple of heat-seeking missiles resulted in his destruction. However, according to some concept art, he almost appeared in 2015's Ant-Man 2, and with quite a bold look, we might add. With his Terminator-esque metal body, holographic head, and stylish leather jacket, this android version of ZOLA looks absolutely badass, and it would have been awesome to see it brought to life via Marvel Studios' special effects wizardry. And as for how this Robo-ZOLA would have factored into Ant-Man's plot, well, there was a time when he was scheduled to appear in the first act of the movie alongside Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, Hank Pym, and Alexander Pierce, an idea that clearly morphed into the finished film's 1989 set prologue. Number 9. Thanos' Throne of Skulls. Considering that Thanos murdered his own daughter, wiped out half of all life in the universe just to make a point, and then attempted to lay waste to the entire universe after discovering that his alternate self's initial plan had failed, he didn't really need a scene that made him seem more evil. He was pretty much maxed out in that department. And yet, as revealed by MCU mastermind Kevin Feige, an early idea for Avengers Endgame saw our heroes return from the time heist only to discover that Thanos had already conquered 2023 Earth, which would have been conveyed visually by having the Mad Titan perched atop a throne of skulls. Had it been brought to life, you just know that this would have become one of the most iconic images in the MCU, even if it doesn't make a ton of sense for Thanos to waste his time building a chair that sounds both uncomfortable and easy to knock over. Although, having said that, the guy does do a lot of sitting down throughout the franchise. Maybe he was planning to use the Avengers' guts as chair padding. Number 8. The TVA arrests Rocket Raccoon. The Loki series featured a bunch of wacky alternate versions of the God of Mischief, but for a show all about the craziness of alternate timelines, it was noticeably light on multiversal cameos from the MCU's many familiar faces. After all, it would have been easy to slot in a random Peter Quill or Thor variant in the background of a shot, and back when concept art for the series was being drawn up, the artists had something like that in mind. More specifically, concept art of the TVA's processing area shows a Rocket Raccoon variant stood in line waiting to stand trial for his crimes. In the finished show, this processing area is largely empty, and that's because the COVID-19 pandemic forced director Kate Herron to strip the scene down. Had the pandemic not been a factor, this room would have been filled with characters referencing both the comics and the wider MCU, including potentially everyone's favourite tech-savvy fuzzball. And who wouldn't want to see that? Number 7. Hawkeye vs Captain America. Despite being one of the 6 core Avengers, Hawkeye wasn't used particularly well in the early years of the MCU. He had a cameo in Thor and was then used as Loki's puppet for most of his screen time in the first Avengers movie. It wasn't until Avengers Age of Ultron that he started to get his due, but at one point in time, that due almost arrived a full year earlier, with the skilled sharpshooter almost being part of an intense sequence in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. As explained by the film's directors, the Russo brothers, there was almost a subplot where Hawkeye was enlisted to hunt down Cap, resulting in an awesome confrontation between the two heroes where Arrow met Vibranium's shield. They said, "There was an awesome sequence where they confronted each other in a ravine on the outskirts of DC, and Hawkeye was shooting a series of arrows closing in on Cap, Cap closing in on him, and then Cap took him down and he realised for the first time that Hawkeye was trying to trick S.H.I.E.L.D., where he whispered something into Cap's ear that Cap had a tracker on his suit and to punch Hawkeye to make it look real, because there was a Quinjet hovering above where they were watching the feedback back at S.H.I.E.L.D. The intent with this subplot was to complicate the relationship between Cap and his S.H.I.E.L.D. allies, and bringing in Clint to serve that purpose would have added a bit more texture to a character who, at that point in the franchise, sorely needed it. Number 6. The Living Tribunal judges Thanos. As a certain Jedi Knight once famously commented, "There's always a bigger fish." As we previously mentioned, Thanos committed more than his fair share of terrible acts during his time in the MCU, and though he clearly assumed that he was the universe's top dog and that nobody would take him to task for his actions, that was far from the truth. Before the Avengers dealt with him in Endgame, a scrapped idea from Avengers Infinity War would have seen the Purple Space Warlord face the consequences of his actions in the form of a meeting with a much bigger fish than Earth's mightiest heroes. We're talking about the Living Tribunal, a powerful cosmic entity that is essentially the judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to universal affairs. "We stuck the Living Tribunal in the movie," said Infinity War co-writer Christopher Marcus. "As Thanos and Doctor Strange came to blows, Doctor Strange blew Thanos' mind and sent him through the mindscape. The Living Tribunal would have then shown Thanos all his crimes against the universe and unsurprisingly judged him guilty. Though this scene would have perhaps been a bit too outlandish even for the MCU, Eternals demonstrated how jaw-dropping these massive cosmic beings can look on the big screen, so seeing Thanos come face to face with one would have been quite the visual feast. Number 5. Iron Man and Doctor Strange's Sherlock joke. Sticking with Infinity War, and with Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark and Benedict Cumberbatch's Stephen Strange meeting on screen for the first time, there was no way the filmmakers would resist the urge to crack a Sherlock Holmes joke. Right? Well, somewhat surprisingly they did. Even though it was the most obvious gag in the world, and even though fans would have loved it, the movie didn't deliver. But during production, the idea was seriously floated about. "I should have said, 'No shit, Sherlock,'" noted the Russo brothers on the Infinity War commentary track. Everybody really wanted that joke. It's also really easy to imagine Tony saying something like that too, so it's not like a Sherlock gag would have been unfitting, especially with the two heroes butting heads like they were for most of Infinity War. Thankfully, we do still have one Sherlock alive in the MCU, so the opportunity for a character to make that reference is still very much on the table. Number 4. A Christopher Nolan style The Incredible Hulk. It's a forgotten detail these days, but on top of being its lead actor, Edward Norton actually did some writing on The Incredible Hulk, and was reportedly still tweaking the script in the middle of principal photography. He envisioned the film as a serious, grounded story in the vein of then recent reboots like Batman Begins and Casino Royale, declaring that his goal for the project was to make it like what Chris Nolan had done with Batman. Marvel Studios initially seemed enthusiastic about Norton's take, but as the film inched closer to release, the actor realised that he wasn't on the same page as everyone else. This resulted in The Incredible Hulk being a much more standard popcorn flick than the cerebral blockbuster he wanted to make. He said, "I loved the Hulk comics. I believed they were very mythic, and what Chris Nolan had done with Batman was going down a path that I aligned with. Long, dark, and serious. If there was ever a thing that I thought had that in it, it was the Hulk. It's literally the Promethean myth. And Marvel were like, that's what we want." As it turned out, that wasn't what they wanted. Though it's probably tough to do a gritty Nolan-style movie when your lead character can turn into a giant green bodybuilder, the idea of a more thoughtful Incredible Hulk flick sounds fascinating, though perhaps a little risky for the MCU's second project. Number 3. Doctor Strange's tragic childhood incident. Stephen Strange isn't a very likeable character in the first half of his origin movie. See that cruel moment where he rants at Christine when she visits his apartment. Clearly an intentional decision by the filmmakers to make his heroic turn more satisfying. And though on the whole we do feel sorry for Stephen after his accident, it wouldn't have been a bad idea to give us more of a reason to root for the character in those early stages. Well, as it turns out, such a reason was actually shot before being removed during editing. According to director Scott Derrickson, the film almost included a sequence set during Stephen's childhood, where his little sister, played by Annabelle creation star Lulu Wilson, tragically drowns. This obviously has a significant effect on the future Avenger, and is instrumental in setting him on the path to become a doctor. A quick flashback to this moment while Stephen is in his post-car crash days might have worked quite well, humanising the character that little bit more, without being too much of a drag on the movie's pacing. But alas, it was given the chop, and the scene has never been officially released. The incident was mentioned in Multiverse of Madness though, so it's still canon as far as the MCU is concerned. Number 2. The aftermath of RHODEY'S Civil War injury. Though supporting characters like War Machine do get some great moments in the MCU, they're often shortchanged in the story department in favour of our avenging A-listers. With that in mind, this cut idea from Infinity War would have given Tony Stark's bestie a much more compelling through line during Phase 3 of the franchise. In Captain America Civil War, Rhodey suffers an accident that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. It's a monumental moment for the character, but when we next see him in Infinity War, his injury is pretty much glossed over, as are the mental scars it surely left on him. But that very nearly wasn't the case, with concept art for that third Avengers movie showing Rhodey inside a fancy rig, piloting his War Machine armour remotely during the battle in Edinburgh, which he isn't a part of in the finished film but was supposed to be during planning, as was Banner in the Hulkbuster. Over on Instagram, artist Phil Saunders explained that this was because Rhodey was suffering from PTSD after his near-fatal crash in Civil War, which had made him feel that remote piloting was the safest way to carry on. It's a small detail that would have given the character a bit more depth throughout Phase 3, and based on that artwork, it would have looked damn cool to boot. Number 1. Captain America's epic World War II battle. Captain America the Winter Soldier is about as good as MCU movies get, but here's a sequence that would have made it just that little bit better. Hell, it's a sequence that Marvel Studios liked so much that it was still in the film 2 months before shooting began, only being axed at the very last minute. In a 2020 interview, directors the Russo brothers revealed that The Winter Soldier originally opened with a battle set during World War II, which would have concluded with a significant moment for Cap, directly feeding into the rest of the movie's story. The filmmaking duo described the battle as massive, indicating that it would have been several minutes long as opposed to a couple of quick flashback shots. From the Civil War airport fight to Endgame's battle for Earth, the Russo brothers have delivered some of the best brawls in the MCU. So it would have been amazing to see their take on a battle set during the Second World War. And with The Winter Soldier exploring how Cap's old-fashioned sensibilities clash with the modern world, an opening like this would have only added to the film's thematic richness too. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed something, then do let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.